So let me just start part two with general context. And I don't really have much to say here because it's been done as well as it can be done. Uh, there's this guy called Bill Wirtz who's made a video called History of the World, I guess. I think it's incredible in terms of its presentation, its keeping away from biases, and it's finding a way to condense a lot into very little. I don't think it's casual watching. I think the right way to approach the video would be to see it with the intention of eventually understanding every component of it and continuing that research for as long as it's needed on the back burner. If I could change a micro thing about the world, I would have this be essential watching. And maybe as a subject in a Euro school, or just for an individual, just watch the video, hold in your heart the importance of understanding it. And I strongly believe that's as much general context as we need. Moving from there into a very specific fruit from the tree of human knowledge, and this one's related to quantum physics. I do feel that the misfortune of this field with respect to the average person is that it lends to so much poetry. It connects with spiritualism and some of the terms that it wants to use, like energy and vibration, so well that people make jumps that are bigger than the field is allowing for and miss the steps and leaps in that interconnection that the field does offer. I would just want to point to one very specific thing, which is the double slit experiment and maybe the delayed choice experiment as a result. And I do believe what they are pointing to concretely is the fact that matter and the physical world tend to see sentience as just another system and tend to collapse the same way from observance and thus from sentience as they would when encountering another physical system. I think this is of utmost importance to us as individuals in terms of understanding our relationship with the world at large, and I think that should be paid attention to without seeking greater poetry than it offers. Um, Onto a slightly larger field, which is a little trickier to understand, and maybe general context helps first. But macroeconomics is other interesting in the way it functions and the way it came about, and its absolute necessity almost to our progression and getting to here. And just following the links of it is interesting because that lets you truly see some of the contexts of where we are and its relevance to you. And everyone has a micro personal relationship with economics as well. I just feel that is better contextualized if you do it with the context of macroeconomics. So I've listed maybe a little step by step arrow sequence here. And if you follow that enough to the point where you start understanding how much of the world's wealth exists in credit or what shorts are, uh, you then start to understand the picture. I think all of us already understand the distribution of wealth, the imbalance of it, and the realities that creates. But it's important to understand how and why, to then understand the place of your journey, maybe within that, and thus the place for that within your journey. Uh, that brings us, I feel, to power itself. Economic power is obviously disproportionately large in the world as of now, but other forms of power have always been relevant and will always be relevant. The reason is that the reason we want to talk about it here is that humanity seems to find it difficult to define a system or to commit to a system that acknowledges it, because by nature of what it is, it feels unfair. It's something that can function under different rules from those without it. It's something that, by nature of what it is difficult to govern. And because of that, the vast majority feels alienated to the minority that actually have power of some sort. It doesn't matter what form that power is. It can be just based on your natural qualities, it can be representative, appointed, acquired, inherited, but it leads to a disconnect between it and other parts of the system. And the natural respect that it should have from the rest of the system and it should have for the rest of the system tend to not exist, because, as I said, it's difficult to framework a set of rules. It's difficult to function under a system that recognizes power, unless you just let power define the system for you, and then perhaps it gets difficult for everyone else to function under it. But this brings us neatly along to maybe the nature of administration. I'd like to touch upon a point here, which is a borrowed point, but paraphrasing it, it basically says that the qualities that one requires to reach positions of importance and power and administration are perhaps objectively the opposite of qualities you would want in people in positions of power and administration. But I think this is referred to as the great misfortune of humanity, but it's just a feature, and we can recognize it and we can understand what an incredibly difficult job it is getting there, or being there, or staying there, or actually having that role and that power. And if that can be admired and appreciated and sympathized with, we can find the equilibrium to solve that problem. We can find the necessary compromises we may need to have on the system. Now, sympathizing with administrators themselves, you have to understand that irrespective of the wishes of a population can only be governed at the level of maturity that is common amongst them, and you will thus always look to the lowest common denominator there while setting your rules. But there will always continue to be a part of the population that is higher on the maturity levels than the part that would require those rules to be stringent. That balance in catering to the different sections of society on this particular parameter is a incredibly difficult challenge. Now, to keep those positions, to get there in the first place, the thought on the or the mindset is far easier as the thought or mindset that would see a crowd walking and start walking in front of it, rather than a thought or mindset which would say that, no, this feels like the best direction, I'm walking here, walk behind me. It's hard to expect people in roles of power or administration to be able to do that, because the system is not designed like that. It's designed to be more like tennis, or as a world leader compared it to like American football. It's difficult to play that as chess, and perhaps at times that is what is required. Then, of course, there's the interrelation that people in administration have to account for power and often bend to it, and then have to do things behind closed doors and under the tables to account for it. This is not a problem of the nature of administration, it's more a problem with the nature of power itself, as discussed. But largely, I feel the trust deficit and the sense of alienation one has to positions of power and administration is misplaced, and it's on all of us to correct it. A lot of it comes because we seek hierarchy, we seek to see superior, inferior as part of our own journey to see if we're genuinely improving or climbing up or going down. Uh, I Hierarchy seems to me more like a perceptional obligation than a reality. If you were to look at the nature of the world, the nature of existence, and have no emotional investment in it, you might well see that hierarchy is a myth. Nothing is above or below anything to the extent where it really matters. And especially if you look at objects of the same kind, beings of the same kind, the hierarchy between them tends to be almost trivial. Yet for our pursuits, it almost feels all important because, as I said, it is a perceptional obligation. If you're going to be an emotional being in a biochemical mechanism looking to survive and looking to thrive, you best understand whatever hierarchy exists very well. And not only that, we move on from there to the nature of difference itself. And we see how that's becoming so much more relevant in the world. And while not exactly the same thing, a similar thing applies here. If you look at human beings and you look at the basis of what they are, you will find that the two people who perhaps feel most opposite to each other or feel the most differences between each other, in an absolute sense, they are 99.99996% the exact same thing. But it's just we're tuned to see those differences, to feel those differences, and to act on those differences because there is a nature of my team versus the other team at play here. But you can look at any of the breakups, and I've listed a few here, and they are just a few, there are actually plenty more. But you look at sex, ethnicity, nationality, religion, socioeconomic differences, you look at the conservative, progressive difference, left and right, you look at genders, you look at the different fields and what all they offer. And I have noticed a phenomena here. I have noticed that all of them have different attributes. And over here, I've gone with listing fields just to talk about it, but it's a principle that would apply to any of the others. And for example, you look at art and politics. What tends to happen there is that in art, individuality is celebrated, and individuality is timid. It has nuanced, specific opinions, and thus the art community tends to function very differently. In politics, you tend to be more aggressive, you tend to want to attack and defend, and it's very difficult for individuality to do that on its own, and thus in politics, you tend to have camps. Thus, the ways in which individuals in this group would seek validation, or what those individuals would seek to do, or how they would look to talk and communicate, would be very, very different because the goals being chased are very different. But if you look at an individual just as an individual, you would find that all these features exist within us as well. And we can choose to nurture them, we can choose to hide them and suppress them. But ultimately, we will be a mix of those combinations. We will never be alien to another group. We will never be completely part of one group, even though we can very extremely be colored by it. But there will be a sense of the other within, and it's on us really to understand that if there are differences, the differences manifest as parts of a puzzle, and that puzzle exists within us. That puzzle does not exist in subsystems because subsystems are meant to be pieces of the puzzle. But both when you look at the macro perspective of the system itself and when you look at the micro perspective of every individual, you will see parts of the features of these differences within each individual and within the system at large. And sure, parts, as discussed before, can be nurtured and brought to the surface, parts can be suppressed and kept deep down. But ultimately, if we have an understanding truly that that's how this tends to work, those are the features of difference itself, then it perhaps gets a lot easier. And you look at the hostility in the world today, you look at the problems we have, and when I speak of hostility, I speak both externally, of course. There is hostility of the sorts that's gone on for generations and has become a cycle of hate that results from those differences being felt. There is hostility that is new, that comes on a daily basis, on a difference of opinion or on a difference of desires. And that tends to throw the system of balance. It's also very interesting that without a top down sentient approach, if you try to speak to any of the parties of a hostility itself, then without it, you are just another. You are just debating from another perspective to a perspective. But it would be great if someone could genuinely represent a top-down sentience attempt in conversation, and that might work very interestingly too. But I also feel that, as discussed before, we can have internal hostility too. And when I say that, I want to imply that in a natural state, maybe we want to seek balance, maybe we want to seek peace. But while it was always easy to throw off one's internal balance, in the overstimulated world today, as discussed before, it's very easy to be hostile to your own self and to continue that process. The next part, I would like to remind you of identity preservation, because I do genuinely feel that for most people, this is probably where it will kick in. We spoke of macroeconomics a while back, and this is just a different side of that coin. It's how we treat money as individuals, our own economics. And I just want to say here that starting off, my own personal wish would be that people saw money just as choice. And while there's a part of our economics that we tend to relate to choice, I mean, in terms of course, if survival is the quest, survival is the quest. But everything after that becomes choice. And that is how we should relate to it. We have to understand that the world we live in today, the advancements we've made, whether you look at just the security we have, you look at water filtration, you look at penicillin and antibiotics and lifespans, you look at hospitals, takeaway food, you look at GPS, and you realize that a overwhelmingly large percentage of humanity is living personal lives that emperors and great leaders of the world gone past could not have given themselves. And yet we are obsessed with logical quests. We are obsessed with protectionism without relating that to choice itself. And I feel that's on us personally. And if it was really up to us personally, maybe a lot of us would be looking at it differently. But a lot of us related to also making choice for the people that we relate to, whether that be colleagues or families or people of the same subsystem in any way. Um, Over here, I feel that whatever your calculations are, that your logical quests should govern your identity and your decisions as much as they need to. And you can have that need be defined by whatever defines it, whatever you choose to define it. But compromise on your identity, compromise on your versions of truth to the point where they need it, not a smidgen more. There are a lot of people who will find themselves coming out of scarcity driven environments. or coming out of greed driven environments, even at the top. But you have to understand that those interrelations with logical quests were not meant to rule your mind or your identity. They were meant to get you out of the need for scarcity and greed. And if your predecessors or your earlier generations have lived that, it does not need to apply to you. And look, there's a way the world works. Maybe 5% people, 3%, 10% will be able to rise above the system. And maybe a similar percentage, maybe a little more, will always try to hack the system for short term goals. I understand that the vast majority in the middle currently feels that this is the system they need to function under. And they'll be happy functioning under whatever system is presented to them. And the system presented to them right now functions under very simple rules. It functions under that everyone must be committed to go out and use whatever skill and gifts and capabilities and help that they have been given to then squeeze every last logistical drop out of it to better the lives of themselves and of their loved ones. And they're also told that a fool and their money are soon parted. And we all tend to then live our lives on the basis of that carrot and stick, leading, of course, to the lake house phenomena. Now, this is not meant to change your perspective towards any of this. I love the line that a healthy mind is one that can carry two opposing perspectives for a while. And most people will and should get back to their exact opinions of what their microeconomics are. I am just looking to offer a different perspective on that. And it is related to macroeconomics, and it's related to difference and hostility and to quantum physics that we discussed and to art. But as said before, I am completely aware that this is where identity preservation tends to be the harshest. And so we'll leave it on that note. We'll keep part two a little shorter, and we have a little more to talk about. But just to recap here, we've tried to get general context on the story, in which, without giving context really, I have just suggested that the journey from the Big Bang to the journey of life, to the journey of the first humans, and shifting to hunter gatherers, to social hierarchy, to currency, to large societies, to the interconnected world, that we look at this journey maybe with the help of this beautiful video already out there. We've sort of spoken about macroeconomics and how that got here. We've spoken of power and administration. We've spoken about the nature of hierarchy and differences themselves. And then we've spoken of microeconomics and a perspective that may just be mine, may just be an alternate perspective, and may just cause identity preservation to kick in some people. I hope you'll forgive me for that if that did occur. And I hope you'll see me in part three